We have a culture in New Zealand in which we like to encourage each other to vote in the elections. That's a good idea in theory, but we don't all know who to vote for, and often when we do, we tend to object to people who vote differently to us. So my aim in this video is to try and talk about why different people vote in different ways and suggest some ways of thinking about it. So New Zealand is a democracy, which means that most New Zealand citizens over the age of 18 get one vote each to say who should be making our country's economic decisions, our educational decisions, our health decisions, our law decisions, and decisions in many more important areas. It's a nice thought that everybody gets a say. However, that's also democracy's biggest pitfall. Most people in New Zealand know very little about economics, yet we're expected to elect an economic leader. I know very little about the health system, yet my vote is equal to a doctor or, say, a regular patient. Therefore, parties are forced to advertise to the layperson, and unfortunately the most effective way of getting elected doesn't consist of writing their policies out in simple English, listing the pros and cons. The most effective way of getting elected is to put a negative spin on your opponent's policies and build as much distrust in them as possible. The media helps here too because they love reporting on scandal. When left-wing MP Sue Bradford proposed and put through a bill to stop family violence, right-wing MPs quickly labelled it the anti-smacking bill, even though the bill has very little to do with smacking and a lot to do with family violence. However, the anti-smacking bill label became popular, enraged many people, sparked many protests and a costly citizens-initiated referendum, and it's still referred to as the anti-smacking bill by many people today. Then a few years later, right-wing MP and PM John Key proposed a mixed ownership model for some state-owned enterprises, which is once again, a fairly trivial matter to anybody familiar with buying and selling shares. However, it quickly got renamed asset sales by left-wing MPs, and images were conjured up all over the place depicting New Zealand land being stolen from underneath people's feet and sold to foreign rich investors, with rich people in New Zealand receiving the cash. Once again, people all over the country became enraged, protests were made, and a costly citizens-initiated referendum was sparked. These are just two examples, one on the right, one on the left. I'm sure you can think of many more examples over recent years. And another thing we see is graphs, lots of graphs. Every graph National publishes has a red line going down until we get to 2008, and then it has a blue line going up after that. Every graph Labour publishes has a red line going up until 2008, and then it has a blue line going down after that. If you've done high school statistics, you will know that you can make any set of data say anything you like. Sometimes it's just a case of choosing between percent values or absolute values, other times it's a case of comparing whichever two sets of data make the point that you're wanting to make. But if it's still too hard to show the trend that you're wanting to show, try and find a high or low rank compared to other countries. But graphs seem to be an effective tool for convincing lots of voters that there is data to support a particular party's cause. The graphs get made by political parties and then get spread around Facebook and things like that by its followers. The exaggerated messages coming from all parties is fueled by their incentive that if they do well, they will get into government, will have a pay rise, and are able to win their personal competition and prove to their opposition just who has got the biggest party. Now, don't get me wrong, politicians are actually generally very good people who are in politics because they genuinely want to make a positive difference to our country in all sorts of ways. It's just a shame that our democratic system forces them to use terrible methods to get into power to make that positive difference. It's also a shame that we can only vote one party in, even if we like, say, one party's economic policy but we like their opponent's health policy. However, time and time again, people comment how lucky we are to live in a democracy. Eric X. Lee did an excellent TED talk recently about why China's one-party system has some excellent benefits, how it can work so much more efficiently than a democracy, and why Westerners could potentially be arrogant to assume that democracy is the only best way to run a country. He discusses usual questions such as corruption, so if you're interested in that point of view, I highly recommend that you check that out. But for now, and probably for the foreseeable future, New Zealand's stuck with a democracy, so let's move on and talk about that. For many people, politics seems to be like a sports game crossed with a religion. It's like a sports game in the sense that they choose a political party to vote for early in life and will cheer that party on. When the party gets elected, it feels like winning a tournament. However, it's also like a religion because many party voters like to think that their party is the only correct party, doing anything to defend it, and they believe that they're doing a good service to mankind by convincing others to leave their incorrect ways and vote the same way as them. Unfortunately, I've seen on Facebook many political posts which in fact bully those who are voting for a different party. They say things like, "Can you believe people still vote for this party?" Or, "Only sheeple vote for this party." Or, "I can't believe how many selfish people voted for this party." Incidentally, if you are one of these Facebook posters, I encourage you to look at the latest poll and multiply those percentages by the number of your Facebook friends to work out how many people you might be alienating or offending when you make a post like this. Okay, so let's talk about left-wing and right-wing. When it comes to economics, a left-wing voter, also known as a socialist, prefers government control of markets, which generally means the government regulating income by putting higher taxes on higher incomes to decrease the gap between rich and poor, increasing minimum wages, forcing public holidays, and generally trying to help those who need more money and better working conditions and don't have the means or desire to make it happen themselves. An extreme example of socialism is communism, in which the government will take 100% of a worker's income and then distribute it evenly amongst all citizens, or at least according to need. It attempts to give those born into poor families equal opportunities to those born into rich families. The left-wing system seems pretty ideal so far, but there is a fatal flaw most religious left-wing voters like to ignore. The system relies on every citizen to work and innovate for no extra financial reward. In other words, laziness is rewarded under the scheme. Not all humans can be trusted to serve to their full potential without reward. Therefore, despite its advantages, it doesn't really work on a big scale. A right-wing voter, also known as a capitalist, prefers a free market, which means less government control. With earning potential not limited by the government, it provides a great incentive for people to both work hard and innovate, creating a more modern society. But capitalism's fatal flaw, which religious capitalists like to ignore, is that it relies on those who find themselves well off to be voluntarily generous to those in need, and once again, because humans can't all be trusted to be generous with their means, it also doesn't work on a big scale. So a left-wing party provides equal reward to people regardless of their ability to work or willingness to work, and a right-wing party provides equal treatment to people regardless of their ability to work or willingness to work. Both have great advantages and fatal flaws. Fortunately, our major left-wing parties, Labour and the Greens, actually have many right-wing policies to encourage competition and innovation, and our major right-wing party, National, actually has many left-wing policies to allow charity and assistance to those who cannot help themselves. Often in an attempt to politically sway people, a left-wing campaigner might say that those who vote for National are just the very rich and selfish who want to profit from the poor, and a right-wing campaigner might say that those who vote for Labour are just the very lazy who want to live off the dole funded by tax paid by those hard-working enough to get a job. However, these generalisations are both rubbish and show a gross misrepresentation or misunderstanding by the person making the statement, and more importantly, show that the person has perhaps become a member of the religion of a particular left or right side of politics. Now, at this stage, you might be thinking, well, I believe in incentive to work and I believe in financial equality. That's great, so do most people if you ask them, but just remember that if you believe in incentive to work, then you also believe in financial inequality, and if you believe in financial equality, then you also inherently believe in less incentive to work. Unfortunately, an optimum balance that suits everyone just doesn't really exist. Now, we've only talked about the economic left-right spectrum, which is the traditional definition. However, it gets complicated because there's also a social left-right spectrum, and there's a religious left-right spectrum, and there's a war left-right spectrum, and so on. I'm going to talk about the social one and then leave it there because that's all we have time for. So let's talk about the social spectrum. Unlike the economic spectrum, the left wing has less government control. They're also called liberal, and the right wing means more government control, which is also called conservative. A bizarre thing is that the spectrum and the parties don't really correlate as being right or left on each issue, which is what makes the different parties so colourful and multidimensional. Each party will find a place to sit on each spectrum, but not only will their policies change all the time, the popular view of what left and right mean will also slowly move around and in any direction. While a gay marriage advocate might label an anti-gay marriage advocate as a right-wing extremist, the two opinions are actually historically not that dissimilar. 50 years ago, a person who was against gay marriage but was pro-interracial marriage was actually considered left-wing, whereas today they might be considered socially right-wing. The definition of extreme left, centre and extreme right has shown no sign of staying the same ever. And guess what this moving definition of left and right means? It means whatever our political view is today, the chances are that someone in 50 or 100 years will be laughing about how out of date our view is. How similar we all are in New Zealand is also not just a part of being a snippet of time, it's also a part of being a snippet of our world. In my opinion, on the global economic spectrum, even a standard left-wing voter who is pushing for the wealth of the very rich in New Zealand to be redistributed to the very poor in ways such as a minimum wage rise is, on the global scale, actually very right-wing. If a left-wing voter believes in the redistribution of wealth, they could think about that by living in New Zealand, they are themselves in the top few percent of the world's wealthy and could be voting for a party who makes it mandatory to give their money to those who are in more poverty than New Zealand's worst off. Many people already give to the overseas poor out of choice, but most often this is in the order of $1 a day, which is less than 1% of the average income, which is quite lower percentage of wealth to redistribute, and would put most citizens in our country on the global scale as very much against the redistribution of wealth. Why do we not normally think like this? I think it's because most of us don't look outside our country and have settled for making our norms and extreme ends of our scales based on who we have personally met and observed and interacted with. Imagine what greedy a-holes almost all of us Kiwis must look like to the people starving in Africa, regardless of what party we vote for here. So in the meantime, let's look at the bigger picture and appreciate how incredibly similar our views are, and show as much tolerance and understanding as we can to those who vote for a different party. Perhaps that crazy Labour voter, or that crazy National voter, or that crazy ACT voter isn't selfish. Perhaps they just have a different worldview, which might include a whole lot of knowledge and experience that you just don't have. And perhaps you also have a whole lot of knowledge and experience that they just don't have. Perhaps that National policy has some good points. Perhaps that Labour policy has some good points. What a great country we live in, where we can be free to be wonderfully different people. Let's not spoil that by trying to convince everybody to vote exactly the same way as us. So please don't vote based on any graph, hyped gossip, unbalanced criticism of another party's policy or billboard slogan, no matter how clever they are for realising that you can turn the V into a tick. Just jump on their websites, read their policies with a critical eye, work out for yourself if you think they are viable, and also work out for yourself how you think they'll be funded, and work out which party's policies resonate with you the most. Thanks for watching this video. Don't forget to be tolerant of each other, and don't forget to vote. Only if you've done your critical research, of course.